If your child struggles with focus, coordination, behavior, or learning, let me explain something that might finally make this all make sense. It's called primitive reflexes. And most parents have never heard of them, but they might be the reason your child is struggling. What are primitive reflexes? Well, primitive reflexes are automatic movements that babies are born with. They're survival reflexes from infancy. Like when you stroke a baby's cheek and they turn their head to nurse, that's a primitive reflex. Or when you startle a baby and their arms fling out, that's a primitive reflex. These reflexes are controlled by the lower part of the brain. You mean the brainstem, the part that develops first. And here's the important part. Those reflexes are supposed to be temporary. As your child's brain develops, as those higher brain centers mature, those primitive reflexes are supposed to get suppressed. They're supposed to go away. That's what happens during normal development. Here's how it's supposed to work. When a baby does things like crawling, rolling, all these early movements, they're doing something really important. They're developing their core muscles. They're developing their cerebellum, their balance center. As they start to stand and walk, they activate those balance centers. Their vestibular system, which is inside your ears. Their eye tracking system gets added on top of that by standing, walking, moving their eyes. All of that is coordinated in these lower brain centers. And as those systems start to develop, the muscles of the body, the balance centers, the eye tracking centers, all of those things are firing information up into the brain to help it develop, to help it mature and grow. As it matures and grows, the back areas of the brain start to develop. That's where speech understanding happens. Then the front areas start to develop. That's why kids start producing speech right after around a year, right after they start to walk. Because as those systems get fired up at a high rate, because we're going against gravity, these higher brain centers start to develop and mature. And then once these frontal areas really mature, that's when we start to see impulse control, the ability to calm down behaviors, the ability to focus. But here's the key. Once the frontal lobe gets nice and developed, that's what comes down and suppresses all those primitive reflexes. The higher brain takes over. The automatic survival reflexes of infancy start to go away. But what happens when this doesn't happen? What happens when a child skips milestones or doesn't develop these systems appropriately? The primitive reflexes don't get suppressed. They actually stay active. And when those reflexes are still there, still firing, it can create problems. Because now your child's brain is trying to develop higher functions like focus, impulse control, coordination, and learning, but is still dealing with these automatic reflexes from infancy that's supposed to be suppressed. So what does this look like in a struggling child? If your child has retained primitive reflexes, you might see coordination issues. They're clumsy, they trip a lot. One side of the body works differently than the other. You might see balance problems. They don't like certain movements. They get car sick easily. They avoid certain playground equipment. You might see focus issues. They can't sit still. They fidget constantly. They have trouble paying attention. You might see behavioral challenges. They have meltdowns. They struggle with impulse control. They can't calm down their behaviors. You might additionally see learning difficulty. They may struggle with reading or writing's hard. They could potentially reverse their letters. And all of this is happening because that neurological foundation isn't there. The primitive reflexes that should have been suppressed are still active, and they're interfering with everything the brain is trying to do. Here's what needs to happen. We need to assess whether your child has retained primitive reflexes. We need to look at their balance centers, how their vestibular system is actually functioning. Did it actually develop appropriately? We need to look at eye tracking. Is it coordinated on both sides? We need to look at coordination. Is one side of the body weaker than the other? Do they feel their body on one side the same as they do the opposite side? Because a lot of time there may be deficits on one side. Like the right side doesn't feel as well as their left because the left side of the brain didn't develop as efficiently. And then we need to give the brain the specific input it needs to suppress those reflexes, to develop those balance centers, to develop eye tracking centers. We work on that normal trajectory of development. We work on getting rid of those primitive reflexes. We work on developing the balance centers and those tracking centers. We create the foundation for the brain to actually function. Because when those primitive reflexes are suppressed, when that foundation is strong, the higher brain centers can develop appropriately. And that's when kids start to thrive. So if your child is struggling and nobody's assessed for primitive reflexes yet, that might be the missing piece. Book a complimentary consultation at www.truecenter.com or call us at 443-333-9876. We'll assess your child's primitive reflexes, we'll assess their balance centers, their eye tracking, their coordination. We'll show you what's interfering with their brain development and we'll create a plan to address it. Not to treat or diagnosis, but to build the neurological foundation your child's brain needs to function in the way that it was actually designed to.